So here's another common mistake I see new DIYers make. They'll pull board lumber off of a store shelf, take it home, and put it straight to use. If they're building a bookcase, they'll immediately start cutting shelves and sides with it. Or if they're building a deck, they'll start setting joists and bands. But there's a step you should always take before using any board lumber. And that's what I'm talking about today on the Honest Carpenter Show. A few weeks ago, I discussed factory edges on sheet goods and how carpenters trust them to keep things square. It started a debate down in the comments with woodworkers saying that you can never trust factory edges and carpenters saying that you can trust them in some circumstances. I saw that argument coming, and I still insist that carpenters do rely on factory edges in the field. But what we're often more careful with is board lumber. By this I mean linear dimensional lumber that comes in pre-cut lengths and widths. Everyone knows that boards can bow and warp, and I did a video on how to read and even use those warpages. But a far more overlooked problem has to do with the board ends. If a new DIYer wants to cut a board section, they'll often hook their tape onto one of the factory ends, that's the uncut end of the new board, then pull their measurement, mark, and make their cut. But this is a mistake, because these factory ends can't always be trusted. See, while most milled lumber tends to have 4 plain and sanded faces, accurate widths, and even squared or coped edges, they don't always have square ends, or even finished ends. Sometimes the factory end cuts on a wider board are out of square by as much as 1/8 of an inch. That's a really big margin on a 10-inch board. And the ends tend to be a little ragged and less finished than the other board faces. They might be sort of pebbled or weathered looking, and this can highly affect the quality of their usage. Some lumber does have board ends that tend to be milled to a higher standard. This is often called P.E.T, or precision end trimmed lumber. The conventions regarding which boards have well-trimmed ends and which don't are actually very complicated. I'll get to some notable exceptions in a moment. But if you've just brought a board home and you want to use it, you should really always do something first. Check the ends for square. To do this, you typically want to use a Try Square, a Speed Square, or a buzzard wing, which is like a big speed square. Whatever the case, set the square on the lower edge of the board and pull it slowly towards the end. The upright leg of the square will indicate a perfect 90 degrees to the long edge of the board. So if the board end doesn't match this, if it juts out more at one corner, then the end is out of square. Problems arise when you try to build with boards like this. If you're lining up a bunch of shelf ends, you want them all to meet the sidewall square and flush. But if one board end is out of square, it may try to push or tilt the sideboard. You won't be able to get all the components to sit flush. Furthermore, your measurements may be off, because if you hook your tape to the long corner of the board, you'll get a different mark line than if you pulled from the short corner or even the center. So it throws off all the factors that normally let us build square and accurate projects. That's why you want to neutralize this problem from the beginning. If you're assessing a board for use, just go ahead and check the end for square. If it came square and it's a rougher project like deck framing, you can hook straight onto this end and pull your measurements. However, if the end is out of square, or if it's a finer project like shelving, you're going to want to square up the end before you start. Use a miter saw or a circular saw with the speed square to place a new square cut on the very end. You don't have to take much off, typically just a blade width. But this will true up the end. It'll make it square and reliable. Good for pulling measurements from or joining to other boards. And it'll also get rid of that ugly factory end, replacing it with freshly cut wood grain. Now, I'll point out this is often more necessary on wider boards just because they have more space for inaccuracies. I always check or square up my wider boards. You won't see it quite as often in 2x4s or 2x6s because they're narrower. Plus, a lot of these boards, like studs, are precision trimmed so they can be put straight to use on job sites. You may see this indicated on a sticker or a stamp, but maybe not. And some lumber yards will have more out of square ends because they're sourcing from less meticulous mills. But when in doubt, just grab your square and check. And if you can sacrifice an 1/8 inch kerf on a board, go ahead and square it up with a fresh cut just in case. It'll become a habit for reliability. What did you think of the video? Any questions, thoughts? Let me hear about it down in the comments. I'll link some saws and squares down in the description. Feel free to shop those links, and remember that when you do, we receive a small commission at no extra charge to you. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to check back in for more videos coming up soon, and please consider subscribing and hit that little bell button to turn on notifications. That way you'll know the moment we post something. I'm Ethan James with The Honest Carpenter. I'll see you next time.